this is what creates that almost cellular PTSD, that the same toxin then creates the same reaction. The same environmental thing gonna create the same reaction in the body. And sometimes people say like, oh my God, every time during spring, I have allergy to XYZ. Sure, but this is kind of a red flag for you that there's something that it's not changing. Your field looks identical if your body reacts the same way to the same toxin over and over and over again. So my goal is to work with the body physics, because first three stages of any disease, disbalance, disorder, development are disbalances in the physics that you cannot see in the blood work. You can't see that in the ultrasound. You can't see that in the X-ray.
Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey, health junkies. On this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Laura Petkuanite. Laura is a leading practitioner in quantum medicine, and she's specializing in frequency-infused healing. Combining Western and Eastern approaches, Laura works with the body's bioenergetic field to address imbalances at a cellular level. She's using advanced electrodermal screening, and she's identifying disruptions in the body's light and electrical signals to create personalized remedies to reprogram cells and promote deep, lasting healing. In fact, you'll hear her say that she usually only has to do 1 or 2 remedies for folks, which is wild. Now, this cutting-edge frequency medicine science is helping people all over the world. And in particular, I found out about Laura from Seth Jones, another guy that I had on my podcast to talk about building-related illness. So Laura and Seth are connected, and she actually works with him in Nashville sometimes. So I encourage you to check out my interview with Seth Jones on building related illness to get a full picture there, especially if you're wondering if you've got something going on with mold, toxicity, allergies, multiple chemical sensitivities. This is good stuff. Now, really, ultimately, Laura specializes in hard to treat cases and things that, just seem to not fully respond to supplement protocols, diets, things of that nature. Maybe they get better while you're on a certain supplement, then you take the supplement out and you're not getting any better. Or you do better for a little bit and it seems like whatever you're taking, you just don't all of a sudden just stop responding to. So Laura is amazing in what she does. I'm actually working with her right now, and some of the things I'm working with on myself, and so far so good. So let's introduce you to Laura Petkuanite. Laura Petkuanite, welcome to the Health Fix podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, ever since I met Seth Jones and we talked about all of the mold illness and being one of the things that I'm passionate about figuring out, plus mystery illness in general, I'm like, okay, who else can I interview to get more information on how you guys are helping folks to really get your life back in this case? Yeah. So I'm curious, how did you meet Seth? How did you guys get working together on mold? And then, of course, I want to know your history about how did you come to energetic medicine?
So I met Seth Jones a year ago. He was my patient, actually. He came to the clinic to see me as a patient, and we ended up spending like 3-4 hours together, just diving in all the realms that we are both passionate about. And we became friends and colleagues, and now we're kind of working together for the same goal.
Yeah. Really, I mean, it's mold and building illness. I mean, this is a big deal. A lot of folks are getting brushed off, and we really don't know what to do. And when I look at folks, we have lots of protocols, right, that we do first and foremost, because kind of like you were saying before we hit record, I am tied to Western medicine. I am tied to the natural version of Western medicine, and the energetics and that side of medicine is something that we're not as familiar with. It's a little like, for most people, woo-woo, right? And so it's a matter of going like, okay, how do we bridge that gap and really get to folks and be like, look here, this is also so important to your healing process, but also could be the thing we need to do before we get the other things to work, or maybe this is the thing that you've been missing. So
It's very interesting because a lot of times people are very tied to the things that we know, right? And the more you know, the more you don't know. Like the more you start studying and diving into something, the more you understand, like, oh my God, I missed so much. Because at this point, I have 3 bachelors, 2 masters, doctorate. I'm finishing up my PhD. So I'm all in this world, which is like it's a mixed combination from Western, Eastern medicine, quantum physics, psychology, natural medicine. It's all that in order to be as objective as I can with patients, because I know that if we know only one thing, it's very hard to be objective, right? Like our perception is limited at that time. And that's why I'm saying, like, the more you know, the more you don't know, the more you understand, like, oh my God, there is something more that I didn't notice. There is something more that I don't understand. There is something that I definitely can learn and start to understand. So when we talk about energetics and, like, in general, energy, quantum, like all these words, as we were talking before we hit the record button, it's so overused nowadays. And everyone is using these words without fully understanding what it actually is, right? And that's why it's becoming like almost woo-woo concept that everyone's like, ugh, I don't know what it is. Like, I don't want to do it.
Right.
So it's very interesting that the whole functional Western medicine is mainly based on the structure, right? Structure of the molecule, chemistry, biochemistry. We're super zoomed into that. And then we love all the structural piece like CT scans, MRIs, ultrasounds. We love to see the structure. We want to see how it looks like. And we believe that, oh, once I have that image, I will know what to do with it.
Right.
And I always invite people to think a little more globally. And I ask them, like, have you ever been to the funeral? If you did, you probably noticed that not the structure makes you alive. Because under the microscope, dead or alive cell, well, they look identical. So why would I focus on the last bit that actually does not bring aliveness to me? So once we start looking this way, you see that, okay, everything that I see in the blood work, lab work, and I used to be obsessed with it. I thought that that's the best way to understand what's happening in my body. But this is actually the question, what's happening in my chemistry? What's happening in the chemistry of my body? What kind of chemical equations are always happening in my body every second? So I do blood work, lab work to see what's there. But chemical disbalance, that's already 4th stage of the disease, disorder, whatever there is. And if you ever seen periodic table of elements, every element is made from protons, electrons, neutrons. Well, that's physics, right? And this is where we start diving into, like, okay, what happens before it even becomes a chemical reaction? What's in there? So my job and my goal is always to dive into those realms that people cannot see in the blood work or lab work. Because again, if we know that that's already 4th stage of the disease, imagine how much disbalance has to happen before it even becomes visible in the blood work. So my goal is to work with the body physics, because first 3 stages of any disease, disbalance, disorder, development are disbalances in the physics that you cannot see in the blood work. You can't see that in the ultrasound. You can't see that in the X-ray. So when we talk about body physics, there are 2 things that matter the most. Electrical emission, because we all know that our physical body is electric, right? We touch something, we can feel that. And we also know that around every electrical thing, around your computer, your phone, we have magnetic field. EMF became super popular nowadays, right?
Yes.
So there is a magnetic field around every single cell in your body. There's a magnetic field that surrounds your organs, your cells. That magnetism is mainly your shield from all environmental toxins. You can't see that, but it's around 6 feet from you, your bubble that we're living in, right? And in order for us to see that, which can also be considered as our mental, emotional bodies and even higher dimensions, this is magnetism. So we measure light emission for that. We have a thing called biophoton, the smallest particle of light from your biological system. Everyone knows that we are light beings, but then people are shocked when I say, like, oh, but you can measure that. You can see what's actually happening in your systems, because those biophotons, they're measurable. And you can see what's happening in that magnetic field of your organ, magnetic field of your cell, because it's very, very important. Because with any chemical, supplement, pharmaceutical medication, What are we trying to do? We're trying to fix the cell, which is already here. Well, our body would die in 4 days if we have the same cells. It's always repetitive process. Your body is building new cells constantly. But if we are always focusing on the cell, and which is extremely important with mycotoxins and like mold toxicity, and a lot of actually endocrine system disbalances and majority of the issues, we are focusing on what we see right now. Because sure, that's our 0 point, right? Like we want to have a baseline. But with any supplement, with any drug, we're trying to modify that cell, which is already here. In the meantime, well, your body is going to build identical cell. So which leads you to the same medication, same supplement, maybe a little different dosage, but basically the same regimen over and over and over and over again. Because every single system, it has its own pathways, cycles, how it builds new cells. But the critical point is that our body works identical to all of us. You know, you learn one thing how to do it. Like, let's say if we have a salesperson, they have a sales pitch. And if I have a pitch that works great, I don't redo that every day. I just copy paste it always over and over again. Just copy paste it to save my energy. I'm not going to spend my time in the morning before I go to work to, you know, redo something, change something that works. Why would I do that? So until something changes, if the price of your service changes, location, technical parameters, you have to adjust your pitch, right? So until nothing changes, nothing changes. Exactly what happens in the body. Until you give me the information that I understand, which is electromagnetism, nothing is going to change. So I'm going to repetitively build the same cell over and over and over again. And if you just want to maintain the balance, yeah, you will need the same medication. You will need the same supplements. You will need the same over and over again to maintain your baseline. It's a maintenance process, right? So our goal is to see what happens in the cells and what has to happen so they would be able to change and build new and healthy cell. And this process is very quick because sometimes when I start talking with people, they're like, oh my God, it must take years. No, it doesn't. It's pretty quick process because if you know that liver, for example, every 8 weeks, you have new liver cells, right? So it's a newborn baby every 8 weeks. But again, if nothing changes, nothing changes. If you can communicate with that part, if you can actually find the way how to provide that information for your liver that it needs, then it's an easy change. And every single organ has its own, again, pathways, cyclical behaviors, how it works. And our job is to find, okay, what's needed for that organ to actually build a different cell. So I won't need that supplement, that medication, that therapy, whatever XYZ it is, to maintain my health, let's say. So this is the goal, to see what's happening before it even becomes chemical. And once we want to see that, 2 things that matter the most: electrical emission and light emission. These 2 things, they give you information about physical body, electrical piece of the cell. But again, around every electrical thing, we have magnetic field. So once we can measure that light emission, we can understand what's happening in that bubble, what's happening in that magnetic field of your cell. People know that, you know, emotion can cause the disease, trauma can cause the disease, and it's absolutely truth. But the critical point is there is no one-way route in the body. It works both ways. So of course, if you don't have a healthy cell, let's say in your liver, it's going to make you feel one way or another emotionally and mentally. It's going to make you irritable. It's going to create like ADHD and focus problems and brain fog and stuff like that. And it might not necessarily be related with the mental health. It can be related with the physical body cell that does produce that specific magnetic field. And we can dive in that for like a long discussion because every organ, every cell has its own patterns. But hopefully I answered your question why that invisible piece, it's really needed and necessary for us to understand.
That's probably the best explanation I've ever had in terms of how these things work, because I think for a lot of people, you know, I think a lot of people are starting to realize that we have energy, right? That we have electrical emissions. But, you know, I try to explain from the level of Chinese medicine, we have something called Wei Qi, which, you know, is our outward Qi, right? And this is our energy that we give off. But like also the same thing is the energy we give off, like how people feel when they're in a room with us. right? How
Exactly.
people are attracted to us, things of that nature. And so I like to paint that picture a little bit for folks that, this is also part of our medicine and how we feel, not like how we feel, look at the labs, how we feel is how
Exactly.
we're vibing in terms of light and energy.
Absolutely. Because, sometimes people, especially after diseases, traumas, mold toxicity, let's say, they don't have that magnetic field at that point because it's so scattered because of a toxin that anything can affect you. Like your body does not have a shield. And that magnetism has specific way how it gets scattered. But again, if we get back and remember that, well, my body is going to rebuild the same cell over and over again, it means my magnetism going to look like this over and over again. This is what creates that almost cellular PTSD, that the same toxin then creates the same reaction. The same environmental thing going to create the same reaction in the body. And sometimes people say like, oh my God, every time during spring, I have allergy to XYZ. Sure, but this is kind of a red flag for you that there's something that it's not changing. Your field looks identical if your body reacts the same way to the same toxin over and over and over again. Because a lot of people, let's say after mold toxicity, they have this sensitivity to mold to the level where it does not let them to actually enjoy life fully. They have to be very aware where they go,
Right.
all these things. But this is exactly the place where you have to recreate that electrical and magnetic piece in your body that would not create the same reaction. Because before you do that, your field looks like it's almost catching that particle of the mycotoxin. It catches that. Oh, cool. It creates the same reaction because it's familiar. Until you recreate that, and then your field becomes like, oh my God, this is unfamiliar. I don't have to react to that. Because again, this is the question that it's very common in the mold world. Why some people have these kind of crazy symptoms with this toxin and some people don't experience nothing at all? And of course, we talk about genetics, but then when we talk about genetics, we have to ask the question, well, what is our DNA? It's a construct of light, right? So if we get back, we understand like, okay, so if it's a construct of light, what makes that specific gene active? That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Because genes, as epigenetic states, they can get turned on, off. It's always a combination that makes you who you are. Because basically on genetic code, you're very similar to banana on the counter. Well, you look differently and you act differently. So what makes that difference? And this is exactly that combination of light that creates like a beautiful geometry that makes you who you are. So it's very interesting when we navigating all these elements of mold and other conditions, all the viral conditions, all the conditions that people don't know what's happening. Because yes, sometimes your blood work is not going to show anything. Like it's going to be called like mysterious illness, right? Because you have symptoms, but we don't see nothing chemical what is wrong with you. Well, it's not on the level where it can be chemical. It's more than enough to have this balance in the physics to feel the symptom. It does not have to be chemical to feel subjectively worse, better, or whatever way that you feel. And that's why I believe that subjective matters even more than objective data that we can gather. It's all data, right? We do blood work, we get some chemical data. We do some screenings on electricity, light, we get the physics data. We can have data from the MRI. We can have structural data from the X-ray. We can have subjective data that matters. And this is what practitioners should do to actually know how to navigate through it. Not just grasp one piece of data and think that it's going to show you like 360 view. It's impossible. We are so multidimensional that we have to gather as much data as we can in order to see just a little bit and actually to make a decision.
That's exactly how I feel. And the missing part for me has been the physics part of it, because so many people, which you described, like the body has a shield, but if it loses a shield because it's scattered from mold or from, let's face it, there's so many people right now that have multiple illnesses.
Absolutely.
Right? There's like autoimmune, there's POTS, there's EDS. So, Ehlers-Danlos, for those who are listening and trying to figure out what EDS stands for. I mean, some people can have like 4 or 5 different things. And when I see that, I go, okay, it's hit the physics level. And
exactly.
We got to go
It
somewhere
always
else.
starts in the physics, right? Because for it to become chemical, there has to be physics. Like chemical particle just not float around us, right? Like it has to be protons, electrons, neutrons. We learned that in school, right? That everything is made from atoms. But we forget it down the line when we go to like, universities. And like when I studied that, my question was like, okay, why do we always, in Western medicine, why do we always look for the cause where the result is? If you have an eye problem, you go to see an eye doctor and no one cares what's happening in your body.
Yeah.
This is the result that it's presented. Why do we feel that the cause has to be exactly in the same place where the result is? This is classic physics, right? Cause and effect. Newtonian physics. Newton created amazing ideas. We have so much things because of it, but it was made for non-living things. And it works great for non-living things. And by default, we applied it for the human body. But now we know that, oh my God, there is something in the body that makes us live. There's that informational flow like electromagnetism, chemical reactions happening all the time. But we kind of forget that part. I'm like, okay, let's look at the body like we would look at the table, right? And this is why we look for the cause where the result is. And creates a huge gap. Because every condition, it starts somewhere. I'm totally believer and like I saw way too many things to even think that there is something untreatable, impossible. There's no such a thing. And like if someone gets one message from my speech is like everything is possible. Like it is possible. But it requires someone who can co-create that possibility with you. Because it has to be the way. There's always a way. Your body is designed so perfectly that it knows what to do. And like even when we talk about diseases that we feel like we don't know the cause for those diseases, like from the Western medicine perspective, there are a lot of diseases that we don't know the cause.
Right.
But maybe if we look deeper, we can find that cause. Because there's always a way how to figure this out, unless we look at one level only. That level creates limitation. And then your abilities to heal are limited in that level. And if the disease not stemming from that level, well, your abilities are limited then.
Yeah.
So I always encourage to kind of take a step back. It's very hard to solve the problem when we're too zoomed in the problem. To zoom out and see like, okay, what kind of data I can gather about this person, about myself? Like, what can I get to understand where it starts, why it happens to be this way? Because if someone presents like few diseases, few different systems, disorders, usually once you start looking at the physics, you start seeing that it stemmed from one and the same place that we overlooked because it was not visible in like none of the testings that we used to do. Because everything in the body is connected, right? There is no such a piece or system that you can take it out and expect that it's not going to have any effect. There's always communication happening, electromagnetic communication, because your body is 100 times more sensitive to electromagnetism than to any chemical stimulation. So imagine how much of that substance we have to add for the body so it would actually react to it. But if we talk about electromagnetism, this is the language, how your body speaks internally. But again, a lot of times we just forget about it.
Well, I mean, it's been the last couple years where I've started to realize everything I was taught really has, let's say it has merit, but it wasn't the foundation of where to look. Like you're saying, the physics layers where things start, and then we see the symptoms later. And so we're kind of working backwards, unfortunately, instead of the direction we should be. Look at physics first, then move from there. And a lot of times now, and this is something you've probably seen in the chronic, illness, mystery illness department, is that this nervous system and immune system miscommunication department, which literally, in my opinion, I'm curious what you think, it sounds like it's the physics side, because we're talking nervous system, which is literally the electrical and light, and then immune system can't ward off, can't put the shield up.
Exactly. So this is, again, it all stems back to electromagnetism. And as you were saying, like we thought to work backwards.
Yeah.
We see the symptom, like, okay, how do I eliminate the symptom? The symptom is not the main problem. The main problem is that situation that created that symptom, because your body is never trying to make you feel a symptom. If you feel it, it means it took so much compensation, decompensation, reactions to figure this out before you even felt it. If you feel it, it means your body was trying to protect you for like quite some time. And once you feel it, it means like, okay, that protection is not there anymore because your body's busy with something else, right? And nervous system, immune system, it plays the huge role. And every system is equally important, right? There is no such a system that we can neglect in the body, but we have to look at all of them in order to see like, okay, what is not communicating? Like, where is this balance in communication? And what's happening in that cell that it's always repetitively recreated the same? Chemically, you can't reach that level. That's why you ended up just figuring out how to maintain that, how to have this beautiful norm range in your blood work, right? Like how to have this beautiful that people say like, oh, I do feel better. But once I stop using the supplement, I don't feel as good as I used to. Because this is the management. You always giving the chemical substance, you kind of change the chemical equation. But in the meantime, your body's like, okay, here's your new cell. Looks identical because you didn't communicate with that part where it starts. So you have the copy. It means you need the same substance. And this is how cycle goes on and on and on and on. In order to create new and healthy cell, we have to communicate with that piece. And there is no chemical that can communicate with that.
Right. Right. It's on a different energetic.
It's a different layer.
Yeah.
None of those layers are better or worse or matter less or more. It's just a different layer, right? And when we start talking about body physics, this is the place where those frequency medicine comes in, right? Like direct spectrum frequency. And when we talk about frequency medicine, it's not like a high vibe to find your high vibe for your liver or elevate the frequency. Because sometimes people say like, oh, so can we just increase my frequency? Well, no, you would leave this planet Earth if we would increase your frequency for way too high. So the goal is to see when we talk about frequencies, every organ is a constellation, right? Like of electricity, magnetism, all of this light, beautiful light composition. So every organ has different segmentation, how it communicates internally. Let's talk about liver, very popular organ nowadays. Liver has 78 segments. In one segment, you have from 500 to 1500 frequencies. So imagine the amount of numbers only in your liver. So you have to check them all and see in which layer, in which piece of your liver, magnetical, electrical, which segment, which frequency is not communicating well. And find that direct spectrum, like very direct range frequency that would be able to infuse the information for that specific segment of your liver. So it's not that you're trying to elevate the frequency, but you're trying to see which piece actually requires that new frequency so it would be able to recreate that new and healthy cell instead of doing the same over and over again. And sometimes people ask me like, how would I know that my body would choose to create that new and healthy cell and not the same? Because there is no such a living being in the universe that does not want to live. Every single piece of your body always changing, but you have to provide the good information for that to change in the way that you want to. And that's why all these conditions like low-grade viral conditions, why do they stay in the body? Why would we say that there is no way to get rid of Epstein-Barr or herpes virus and da-da-da-da? Well, if there is a way, there is no way if you are focusing on the cell that it's here, you can't, there is no way how you can take it out of the cell. Because as you know, virus lives in the cell, right? So that's why your body just recreates that over and over again with the same virus. But if you can give your body the information for that cell piece, electrical piece, there is no way that it will recreate the virus. You would change the information and it would have new and healthy cell. And then your body goes into the same copy-paste mechanism, but now you just have a healthy cell that can be copy-pasted. And I had millions of clients in cases where it's totally possible to get rid of herpes and stuff like that.
Very cool. Very cool.
You just have to know what to do with that level.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where probably a lot of people are like, all right, Laura, so how do we test to know, what's going on. And then, yeah, what's the next step? How do we use I've been taught that they're called infoceuticals, but I'm going to have you use it in terms of the information, like how do we work on changing things? So I'll
Sure.
let you kind of tell me how it works.
Yeah, usually when people come, first of all, I love to take my sweet time. I love to explain and analyze everything that's happening in that specific person's body. So usually it takes me like hour and a half, 2 hours to have a session with someone, right? So I always recommend people like, hey, just add 2 hours in your calendar just to make sure, because I love to explain everything because I believe that knowledge and awareness can change a lot of things instantaneously in general.
Mhm.
So when we have someone, there are two things that we want to measure: electrical emission, right? That's going to give us information about how the electrons move and stuff like that. That's going to give me information what's happening physically. We don't hear much about heart cancer, do we? If we have a lot of electricity in the organ, it's kind of difficult to build cell like that. So when electricity changes, you see the pattern. You see what can happen in the body when there's too much, too less. And then you start exploring, wait, why? Why there is an inflammation? Why there is a degeneration in the cell? What's happening? So electrical piece gives me information about physical body. Well, again, we know that there's magnetic field around every physical thing, electrical thing. So this is where that biophoton measurement comes in, right? Light emission measurement. That also gives me information about your mental, emotional body movements, how they move in the space. As you were saying, like, why do you resonate that specific vibe when you come into environment and stuff like that? Because this is all magnetism. This is all magnetic piece of the cell. And I know that in all the law of attraction and all of that
Yeah.
world, like everyone talks about magnetism. So yeah, every single cell in your body radiates magnetism. But that magnetism can be impacted because of your cell, not only because how you feel or do things. Both ways. It's always both ways communication, right? So this is extremely important that I have to see physical, emotional, mental patterns. And it's visible from the light emission because, emotionally and mentally, we can start talking about Fiji Islands. We can be there. We can imagine like how fun it is. Well, physical body stays exactly where we started this conversation. So what's up with that physical body? Why does it move that quickly? Because there's a different density in consciousness, right? And that different density gives you the way, how quickly, and how it actually moves. So once you start measuring, you can see the patterns. Like, okay, if I have liver cell, physical cell disbalance, I see that in the mental field. Yeah, it's going to be brain fog. It's going to be focus problem that usually a lot of people experience after mold, because again, liver, it's extremely important organ in this case. You can see how that field actually looks like, but job is to find where did it start it? Did that mental and emotional pattern create a disbalance? Or that disbalanced cell, physical cell, actually created that mental and emotional symptoms that we have? Because it's always communication, right? Like it's always running, it's always in a movement, right? In both ways. So light emission and electrical emission. I have to measure those things to see a beautiful picture. And I have to measure that in all the main systems in your body. Even if you come in, let's say, with hormonal disbalance, oh, I still want to see your heart. I still want to see your small intestine, large intestine, your liver, kidney, and all of it. It all equally matters when you look at that level. Because every single organ, again, it has its own place, how it actually interacts with that system that you feel disbalance. So we have to see all the main systems on the physics level, on the quantum physics level, with light emission and with electricity. Then the finding is to find what it's needed so your body would be able to create that different result. So this is where I'm trying to find that specific frequency that would be beneficial for your body. So, and I measure that like in comparison to your body to see what would happen if I add this frequency. And then you can definitely see like, oh, movement becomes normal, let's say. This is what I want to do. And I promise there are no two people in this world that I made the same batch of frequencies. It's impossible. Everyone is so different because physically, emotionally, mentally, we're so impacted that everyone becomes so different that it's impossible to create something for the whole population. Yeah, you can have some general things, that you see. But usually people want that personalized healing, which is the best way, right? Which means you have to find what kind of frequency, again, on which segment, on which level would be the most beneficial for that person. And then you have to have specific device that infuses that direct spectrum frequency. And this is where the huge misunderstanding can happen, because sometimes people say like, oh, I have Healy device, or I have Rife machine, and like, or I have Tesla coil, or I use PMF mat. This is scalar wave. This is scalar frequency, which means it radiates like this everywhere. Whatever is going to capture it. Direct spectrum frequency has to happen if you want to communicate with specific parts of your body. Because when you have scalar, when you have a mix of frequencies, well, in the physics world, those waves are canceling each other all the time. They can amplify each other, but there is a huge possibility that they're going to cancel each other. And also understand that everything radiates the magnetic field, like everything electrical around you radiates magnetic field. So how is it possible that it's not going to cancel what you put in your body? So that's why that direct spectrum frequency is a complete opposite that you usually see in all the vibrational medicine world. And this is what's needed so we can communicate. And usually I use very beautiful bottles where you can actually infuse. You have to have specific medium that holds the frequency, right? And you have to infuse that frequency, and then people use it, however they need to use it, because different frequency requires different, it's kind of different way how you're going to use it, like how many drops, how often, and stuff like that. It depends on the frequency. But usually people stay on it for like month and a half, 2 months-ish. That can be it. We create enough healthy cells, and that's about it. I don't want you to keep on this all the time. I love to have a follow-up with people, but usually 1 or 2 times, it's more than enough to solve those problems. If people want to dive deeper, I'm always happy to dive into emotional, mental, body patterns and stuff like that. But for the physical things, usually it's 1 or 2 times.
Wow. Wow. I don't think a lot of people, I think a lot of people are like, whoa, really? Only 1 or 2 times. And then, of course, there's going to be the question, what is in the formulas?
Sure.
Like, what's in the medium? What are you using? What's going in there?
So as we know, the best medium in this planet probably is water, right? Mm-hmm. But there has to be specific concentration of trace minerals in it. There has to be specific concentration so it would be able to capture those frequencies, right? You can't take like distilled water and expect that like, oh, it's going to hold any kind of frequency that I infuse. Well, no, different frequencies are going to require different mediums to actually capture that frequency and hold it in here. We did the research in London, and we saw that if you actually use a good medium with a good concentration for that specific frequency, it usually stays for 8-9 months. And you don't even need to use that for this long, right? Because your body adapts to it pretty quickly. Because again, you start talking in the language that your body understands.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's very different for every single frequency, for every single person. But mainly my favorite medium is definitely like water-based, because water is such a beautiful fluid that can hold so much information.
Okay. So, and obviously because we're mostly made of water, that makes sense, because then it can diffuse in a little bit better. The minerals also maybe help it, the information to get across. Okay.
The transmission process.
Okay. And so now the biggest question is like, okay, how do we get the individual frequencies in there? What do you do to get that, like someone's specific protocol or specific frequency?
Yeah. Very good question. So people see me in person, people see me online, right? Like virtually. So if we do it virtually, I always ask for DNA sample, which is like our hair. And as we talk, like I don't need a lot of it. Like I just need 10 strains, like just a little bit. As we know, DNA is light construct. So you can start measuring that light, trace back to electricity once you have that DNA sample. So I measure based on that, right? And then again, I check how your body would react to specific frequency. I have to measure every single thing to see what would happen. And once I see that, oh, if I add this frequency, I see that your liver cell changes, right? What would I do? I have a specific device that can do this specific direct spectrum frequency infusion into the medium. So you have to have a specific device that can actually transmute that, right? It's quantum physics based kind of science, and devices and stuff like that. They can actually do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, that's a little woo, but I mean, if I look back, and for those of you guys who are listening, if we look back, there's been folks in Germany, like Austria. You
Oh
look
yeah,
back and there's multiple devices, and I'm guessing this device is probably European made.
absolutely. And I'm sure you can
Yeah,
hear my accent, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely European.
yeah. And so that's kind of how these things play out, guys. It's Europe tends to be ahead of the game in a lot of these things, but also maybe being able to keep the technology, where the US, it's a little bit biased here. Now, in terms of the biophotons, how does that play in? Because you've got the infusions, you've got the elect. Now, how does the light come into play here?
Because light is everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like everything that you see, like as crazy as it sounds, sound is one spectrum of light,
Mm-hmm.
right? So every frequency, it's a specific combination of biophotons. It is light, like everything is light, like every single frequency is light, biophotonic emission, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same when we call it frequency medicine. On one hand, you can call it like biophotons medicine if that feels better, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
basically it's all about the same thing.
Okay. Because right now in the US, biophoton machines are starting to become more popular. A
Mhm.
lot of folks are getting them. And there are certain folks that are coming into offices like mine and others, and chiropractic offices who've been trained to use it, and then creating specific formulas for folks. But what I've seen, and this is something that I want to get your opinion on, because what I've seen is the folks who are doing this, they're just following the sequence of the
Which is
machine.
impossible,
Yeah.
right? Device is one piece. Like, and again, you can measure only one thing, only biophotons, and create the formula. You're missing so much. You're missing
Yeah.
so much. Again, it's one piece of data. And then it's hard to achieve the results. And this is exactly why we hear about all these things. People usually hear the testimonials that are 50-50. Some people say, like, oh my God, it saved my life. Some people say, like, it didn't do nothing at all. Well, yeah, because if you follow just what device says, it's impossible. Like it has to be person behind the device who understands what to do with it.
Right. And this is where I think a lot of people are kind of falling into the traps with these things, because when I've seen the people go through it, it's someone who's not met it, like they don't, when I guess to sound polite, they don't understand body systems at all. And I'm
Yeah,
drilling them going, well, what about this? What about that? And it's more like, this is what the machine says. Okay, great. And that's kind of where I've been hesitant to recommend folks to certain um processes, because it seemed like it was just another, here's the info, input,
absolutely.
device, output.
Absolutely. I totally hear you. And this is a huge, I mean, it creates so much misunderstanding and it actually decreases the value of
Right.
what those things can do or could do, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
what matters more, like who is behind that device.
Yeah.
To use
Yeah.
the device, it's the easiest thing to learn, right? Like it's a mechanical process.
Right.
But
Right.
if you don't know what it means, if you don't know how that system is created, like how they interact, how they communicate with each other. And that's why, again, when I learned like Western medicine perspective, because I studied in medical school, I thought like, oh my God, I know so much.
Yeah.
Then I learned Eastern medicine, and I'm like, now I can treat someone, now I can understand it. Then I studied psychology in London, an institute in London. Then I thought like, oh my God, now I can understand the full person. And once I started to study physics, I'm like, I don't know nothing at all. None of it makes sense at that point. There is no such a thing that you can learn, and it's like fundamental truth. It's all a combination of the knowledge. Because again, when people come and they're like, oh, my whatever says to me that I can't heal. Well, who says that? Like, which book said that to you? Like,
Yeah.
I don't care that who's the author. Like, I don't care about that. It's like, it's all about what kind of permission I'm giving myself. Like if I'm actually giving myself a permission to dive a little deeper and see like, it can be something more. So I totally understand your perspective that, yeah, a lot of people who are using those devices that, again, majority of those devices are not giving us beneficial information. Um, they don't have any understanding how actually human body works.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something, that with the podcast, I'm always trying to kind of explain, like, we want to be looking for specific clues and definitely having someone pop in that's like, I do biophoton, and it is the hot thing right now. I'm starting to notice it's
It's a
gaining
trend.
traction. Yeah, it's gaining traction. People are like, awesome, this is great. But yes, the whole person, all the things going on make a difference. And labs, I do run them, right? And
Sure.
I do look at them and I geek out on them hardcore. But I think, like you're saying, this is just part of the picture that we bring in
Of
the whole
course.
thing.
And it's
And now,
extremely important piece. But the goal is to see as much as we can from
mhm,
all the layers. And this is when you
mhm.
can make like actual decision that can create long-term lasting results.
Absolutely makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. Because I'm sure there are a lot of folks listening right now who are like, okay, I still don't understand how it works. And guys, truth is I'm going to test this out with Laura, and I can give you more info too. Because for me, I've seen the machines in different capacities and different folks over the years, and still in my mind, I'm like, okay. I am in the camp of believing anything and everything's possible in healing.
Sure.
I'm not someone that's like, oh, you have this. See you later. Good luck.
Mhm.
And I've probably to a fault have tried to convince people more than they were convinced themselves about getting healing, right? And so this is somewhere where I live in that land. And now, obviously, being a doc for 17 years now, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, all right, there's still something missing. Kind of like you said, like, I think I know it all now. I think I know more. I think I know. And then you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's still, other things to put the picture together. And so I think at this point, a lot of folks might be thinking, okay, Laura, all right, I want to learn more about you. I want to learn more about how can I connect with you, whether they can see you in person, how it works for folks to pop down to LA and see you, or how it works virtually, just so they have a sense. Because we were talking about hair, and of course, I was asking like how much hair, because a lot of people are worried about their hair. That's part of their problems. Um, give us the rundown of what it's like specifically to work with you, where they can find you, like the whole scoop here.
Yes. So first things first, I really want to get back to that point where you said like, yeah, sometimes we understand like there's always something missing. And this is
Mm-hmm.
exactly where the beauty of healing comes in. And I always appreciate those practitioners who are at the point where we are not afraid to acknowledge that there is something that we're missing. There is
Mm-hmm.
something that we didn't learn at school. Always something that we can do better, learn more. And this is
Mm-hmm.
exactly the point of life where you can actually help as most people as you can, because then you come in with curiosity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being like, oh, I know what it is. Like, doesn't matter, like whatever you say, I see the lab, I know what it is. You come from curiosity standpoint where it's like, okay, let's figure this out together. Let's
Mm-hmm.
find out, let's co-create whatever can be co-created for this specific person. So
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate that. And I really love when practitioners can acknowledge that, like, oh, damn, there's always something more. Because, yeah, we never stop learning. Like, you always learn like something new, and then you dive into that. And then you see, like, okay, I want to try this, or I want to understand this. And it's infinity pool, right? Like, you're always diving into something. So, yeah, I really appreciate that. And for people who would like to see me, I have place in LA that I work. Like I'm currently site in LA. I also come to Nashville here and there to see Seth. So I have people in Nashville too, and I go to Nashville every month and a half, 2 months ish. So it's pretty often. And yeah, for people online, they can find me on my website and Instagram, and I'm happy to share that. Maybe you're gonna
Yeah.
also put it on like description and stuff. But my Instagram is like whole you LA. And also my email is laura@wellpeoplehealing.com. And I also have a website, which is electrodermalscreenings.com. So it's all these ways that people can find me.
Perfect. Perfect. I have no doubt that folks are going to be intrigued, especially folks who are fed up with nothing working, or they're getting to the
Yeah,
point where some things work, but not everything, and they're still in the same place. And today you had such a beautiful description of the cells just being the same cells, no matter what the input is. And I think that just really resonates. And I hope folks, will take that and go, okay, if I'm keeping
thank you.
putting out the same cells, it's time to turn them over and
Because
and
it works
and
on both levels,
yeah.
physical and trauma responses and emotional. Because if we are triggered the same, if we're triggered the same way emotionally by the same trigger, again, it means like, okay, my magnetism is the same. Something is the same. Right. And there's also a place where we max out the therapy. Like, cool, I'm aware why I act the way that I act. Like, I'm aware where it's coming from. What's next? Like, there's still something that makes me act the same way or feel the same way. So it goes on all the levels, because that cell replication happens on an electrical and magnetic level too, again. So it all matters and it all plays out together, because this is exactly my kind of patients, people who are always coming like, okay, I tried it all. What's next?
Right. What you got? I love it. All right, folks. Well, you know where to find Laura. We'll make sure we put that in the podcast notes at drjkrauseND.com. Laura, thank you so much for coming on. I sincerely appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, fellow health junkie. Thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.